The rope burned like hellfire against her wrists. Vera Blackthorne kept her chin pressed to her chest as rough hands shoved her toward the makeshift stage, the silver threads woven through the binding searing her skin with each stumbling step. The crowd of men before her reeked of whiskey, sweat, and something darker, the musk of predators barely contained in human skin. Last item of the day, gentlemen. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty Oregon Territory outpost. One female, young and strong. Been told she's mute as a stone, ain't spoken a word since Missouri. Perfect for those who want their help seen and not heard. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Vera's wolf whimpered deep inside her, cowering from the sense of dominance and cruelty that hung thick in the air. 3 years of running, 3 years of hiding what she was, and it had led to this, standing on a block like livestock while men decided her worth. She can work without complaint, I'm told, the auctioneer continued, grabbing her shoulder and forcing her to turn. The motion sent her matted hair swinging across her face like a protective curtain. Look at those hands, no soft lady's palms here. She knows labor. What's the starting bid? Called out a voice from the back. 50 cents. Too much for damaged goods, another man shouted. Look at that posture. Probably half dead already. If only they knew how damaged. Vera touched her tongue to her lip, feeling the thin scar that ran from the corner of her mouth toward her ear, a reminder of silver claws and the night her pack cast her out. The night she learned that an Omega's voice could be considered too dangerous to keep. 25 cents. 15. The bids crawled lower. Vera's bound hands trembled, not from fear but from the silver burning through her skin. Much more and she'd pass out, and then they'd know what she really was. Werewolves healed too fast for their own good sometimes. Come now, gentlemen, the auctioneer cajoled. She may be quiet, but she's got all her limbs. Someone start us at a reasonable $1. The voice cut through the crowd chatter like an axe through timber. Deep. Commanding. It carried the weight of mountains and old forests, and something in Vera's chest seized with recognition she couldn't name. The crowd parted, and heavy footsteps approached the stage. Vera didn't dare lift her head, but she could sense him, massive, dangerous, and radiating the kind of authority that made lesser wolves bare their throats. Alpha. The realization sent ice through her veins. Well now, the auctioneer said, surprise clear in his voice. Mr. Reed, wasn't expecting to see you at today's proceedings. $1, the man repeated, his tone suggesting the conversation was over. Going once for $1 to Mr. Tobias Reed. The auctioneer's gavel raised, clearly eager to close the deal with the intimidating stranger. Going twice. Something twisted in Vera's chest, panic, resignation, and beneath it all, a strange pull toward the Alpha's voice. She'd heard it before, though she couldn't place where. In dreams, maybe. In the fevered memories of the worst night of her life. Wait. The auctioneer paused mid-swing. Need to get her name for the record. You, girl, state your name for the books. The crowd fell silent. Vera's heart hammered against her ribs. 3 years of silence, 3 years of safety and voicelessness, and they wanted her to speak now? Here. In front of an alpha whose scent made her wolf pace restlessly behind her carefully built walls? She's mute, remember, someone called out. Records are records, the auctioneer insisted. Come on, girl. Just your name. Vera's throat felt like sandpaper. The silver was making her weak, making her thoughts fuzzy. She should stay silent. Safety lay in silence. But something about the Alpha's presence, the way he stood so still she could feel him listening with inhuman intensity, made her lips part. Still with her head bowed, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, Vera Blackthorne. The effect was immediate and electric. A sharp intake of breath from the big Alpha. The crowd's murmur of surprise. But it was the sudden, complete stillness from Tobias Reed that made Vera's wolf finally look up through her curtain of hair. She caught only a glimpse, massive shoulders beneath a worn leather coat, hands that could span her waist, dark hair that needed cutting. But it was enough to see him freeze like a man who'd seen a ghost. Impossible, he breathed, the word so quiet only werewolf ears could catch it. Vera's world tilted. She knew that voice. Not from dreams, from memory. From the worst blizzard in 3 years, when she'd found a dying wolf in the snow and spent 2 days keeping him alive. She'd sung to him in the darkness, her voice the only warmth in a world gone white and cold. She'd left before dawn on the 3rd day, before he could wake and see her scars, before he could reject her like the others. Before he could learn her name was Vera Blackthorn. Sold to Tobias Reed for $1. The gavel crashed down, sealing her fate to the Alpha who'd haunted her dreams ever since that winter night. The Alpha she'd saved. The Alpha who was about to discover his silent, scarred purchase had a voice that could bring the dead back to life. Chapter 2. The forest closed around them like a protective embrace. Vera kept her eyes on the pine needles carpeting the narrow trail, her bound hands clutched against her chest where the silver still burned. Behind her, Tobias Reed moved with the fluid silence of a predator, his footsteps barely disturbing the undergrowth despite his size. The familiar weight of ancient trees and deep shadows should have comforted her wolf, but 3 years of running had taught her that safety was an illusion. Not much farther, he said, his voice carrying easily through the still air. She didn't respond. Couldn't respond. The single whisper of her name at the auction had already shattered too many carefully built walls. Now, walking deeper into territory that reeked of alpha dominance, every instinct screamed at her to run. But the silver-threaded rope made shifting impossible, and her human form was no match for the wilderness. Or for him. The trail wound upward through towering Douglas firs and ancient cedars, their canopy so thick it blocked most of the afternoon sun. Vera caught glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision, a flash of gray fur, the gleam of watching eyes. His territory. Marked and protected, though she sensed no pack scent. Just him. A lone alpha in a domain built for solitude. "You're safe here," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "No humans come this deep into the old growth. Too many stories about things that hunt in these woods. Stories that were probably true, given what walked behind her." The cabin materialized through the trees like something from a fever dream. Solid timber construction, weathered gray by mountain storms, with a stone chimney already sending smoke into the darkening sky. It perched on a natural clearing where wildflowers grew in scattered patches between towering stumps. A place carved from the wilderness but somehow belonging to it. Vera stopped at the edge of the clearing, her wolf suddenly alert. This wasn't just a cabin, it was a sanctuary. The scent markers were subtle but unmistakable to werewolf senses. Safe territory. Neutral ground. A place where damaged wolves could heal without interference. "Come." Tobias moved past her toward the cabin, his movements deliberately non-threatening. "Let's get those bindings off you before the silver does permanent damage." The mention of silver made her start. Humans didn't typically know about werewolf vulnerabilities. They used silver-threaded rope for its strength and resistance to weather, not because it could burn supernatural flesh. But Tobias spoke as if he knew exactly what the metal was doing to her. Because he did know. Because he was like her. The revelation shouldn't have surprised her, she'd sensed his nature from the moment he'd stepped forward at the auction. But hearing it confirmed sent a shiver of mixed fear and relief down her spine. Relief because pretense was exhausting. Fear because alphas had their own rules about omegas, and those rules rarely ended well for the weaker wolf. The cabin's interior was sparse but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames already crackling behind a wrought iron screen. Simple furniture, a table hewn from a single massive log, 2 chairs, shelves lined with books and supplies. Everything built to last, nothing delicate or ornamental. A bachelor's domain. Tobias gestured toward the far corner where thick firs were piled near a window. "You can rest there. View of the forest, easy escape route if you need it." He paused, studying her bowed posture. "I'm going to cut those ropes now. Don't run. You won't make it a mile in these woods after dark, and there are things hunting out there that make wolves look tame. Vera remained motionless as he approached, her entire body tense for flight despite his words. The scent of him, pine, wood smoke, and something wild and indefinable, made her wolf pace restlessly. When his fingers brushed her wrists, she flinched hard enough to stumble. Easy. His voice dropped to the gentle rumble alphas used with frightened pack members. I'm not going to hurt you. Just getting rid of the silver. The knife appeared in his hand like magic, the blade sharp enough to part the threads without touching her skin. The moment the bindings fell away, Vera gasped as feeling flooded back into her hands. Angry red welts circled her wrists where the silver had burned deepest, already beginning to heal with supernatural speed. Tobias stepped back immediately, giving her space. Better? She flexed her fingers, not daring to lift her head. The relief of being free from the silver was almost overwhelming. For the first time in days, she could think clearly, could feel her wolf stirring with something other than pain. There's a basin and clean water by the window, Tobias said, settling into one of the chairs. Food will be ready soon. Nothing fancy, venison stew and biscuits. Vera remained frozen where she stood, hair hanging like a curtain between her and the alpha who'd bought her for $1. $1. The insult of it should have stung, but instead she felt oddly grateful. He could have let the bidding continue, let someone else claim her. Instead, he'd intervened with the kind of quiet authority that ended conversations. The question was why. You can sit wherever you're comfortable, he continued, his tone carefully neutral. Chair, floor, doesn't matter to me. But you should eat something. You're too thin. Too thin. Too scarred. Too broken. The litany of her failures as an omega cycled through her mind as she moved to the pile of furs in the corner. She sank down with her back to the wall, knees drawn up, still refusing to let her hair fall away from her face. From this position, she could watch him without being obvious about it. Tobias Reed was everything an alpha should be, tall enough to dwarf most men, shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of pack leadership, hands that could kill or comfort with equal ease. But there was something different about him. Something in the way he moved, the careful distance he maintained, the isolation of this place. A lone alpha. The phrase whispered through her mind as she studied him. Alphas were meant to lead packs, to gather wolves around them and rule through strength and wisdom. They weren't supposed to hide in cabins in the deep woods, cooking solitary meals and talking to damaged omegas they'd rescued from auction blocks. What had driven him to this exile? This forest has been my home for 3 years, he said quietly, stirring the pot hanging over the fire. The smell of cooking meat made her stomach clench with hunger. Since the winter of '66. Worst blizzard anyone had seen in decades. Nearly killed me. Vera's hands stilled on her knees. The winter of '66. The winter she'd found a dying wolf in the snow and spent 2 days keeping him alive with nothing but body heat and stubborn will. The winter she'd sung lullabies to a stranger because music was the only medicine she had left. Someone found me, Tobias continued, his voice carrying the weight of memory. A woman. Never saw her face, but her voice. He trailed off, ladling stew into 2 wooden bowls. She saved my life. Disappeared before I could thank her properly. The bowl appeared on the floor within her reach, steam rising from the rich broth. Vera stared at it without moving, her throat tight with emotion she couldn't name. He remembered. After 3 years, he remembered her voice. I've been looking for her ever since, he said, settling back into his chair with his own meal. Not actively, mind you. But listening. Hoping. That kind of debt isn't easily forgotten. Don't, her wolf whispered. Don't tell him. It's safer if he doesn't know. But the need to speak, to acknowledge the connection that hummed between them like a living thing, was almost overwhelming. She'd spent 3 years in silence, 3 years of isolation and fear. The temptation to let someone else carry even a small portion of that weight was nearly irresistible. Instead, she reached for the bowl and began to eat. The stew was perfect, rich venison in a savory broth, vegetables that must have come from a hidden garden. Food prepared by someone who understood nutrition and comfort in equal measure. She ate quickly, efficiently, the way someone accustomed to hunger consumed a meal when they didn't know where the next one would come from. "There's more," Tobias said when she finished. "As much as you want." She set the empty bowl aside and shook her head, finally risking a glance in his direction. He was watching her with an intensity that made her wolf want to bare its throat in submission. Alpha eyes. Predator eyes. But also something else, a gentleness that didn't belong to the dominant wolf she'd known. "The woman who saved me," he said suddenly. "She had scars. I could smell the silver that made them, even through the storm. Old wounds. Deep ones." Vera's hand flew instinctively to her cheek, fingers tracing the thin line that ran from her mouth toward her ear. The movement displaced her hair slightly, and she saw Tobias go very still. "She sang to me," he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Beautiful voice. Strong enough to call a wolf back from the edge of death. I dream about that voice sometimes. Wonder if I'll ever hear it again." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Or maybe an invitation. Vera's pulse hammered in her throat as she warred with herself. Safety lay in silence. Safety lay in remaining invisible, insignificant, beneath notice. But this alpha, this damaged, solitary man who lived alone in the wilderness, wasn't asking her to be invisible. He was asking her to be seen. "Why did you bid on me?" she asked, the words escaping before she could stop them. Her voice was rusty from disuse, barely audible, but in the quiet cabin it carried like a shout. Tobias set down his bowl very carefully. "Because you reminded me of someone. Someone you've been looking for." "Yes." "And if you found her? What then?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Outside, night was falling in earnest, and the sounds of the deep forest were beginning. Owl calls. The rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. The distant howl of something that might have been wolf or might have been something else entirely. "I'd thank her," he said finally. "Tell her what her kindness meant. Ask if there was anything I could do to repay the debt. And if she didn't want to be found? If she had reasons for staying hidden?" His eyes found hers across the cabin, and for a moment she forgot to keep her face averted. In the firelight, his features were all sharp angles and hidden depths. A face that had seen too much, endured too much, but still retained the capacity for gentleness. "Then I'd respect that," he said simply. "But I'd also want her to know that some places are safe. Some people can be trusted. And some debts are paid not with gratitude, but with sanctuary." Vera's breath caught. Sanctuary. The same word she'd used to describe this place when she first saw it. As if he'd built it not just for his own solitude, but for anyone who needed shelter from the storms of their past. "The woman you're looking for," she said carefully. "What makes you think she needs sanctuary?" "The scars," he said without hesitation. "The way she moved, like someone who'd learned to make herself small, invisible. The fact that she disappeared rather than let me see her face." His voice gentled. "Silver scars aren't accidents, especially not on werewolves. Someone hurt her badly. Drove her away from her pack, her family, everything she knew. That kind of damage doesn't heal easy. If at all," Vera thought, unconsciously touching her cheek again. "Some wounds went deeper than flesh and bone, carved trenches in the soul that never quite filled in." "She might not want to be found," she repeated, more to herself than to him. "No," Tobias agreed. "She might not. But if I ever did find her, I'd want her to know that not all alphas are the same. Not all packs demand submission over safety. And not all debts have to be paid with anything more than trust." The words settled over her like a blanket, warm and unexpected. Trust. Such a simple concept, and yet impossibly complex for someone who'd learned that trust was just another word for vulnerability. As if sensing her internal struggle, Tobias rose from his chair. "I'll bank the fire and leave you to rest. There are extra furs if you get cold, and the door doesn't lock, from the inside or out." You're free to leave whenever you choose. He moved toward the hearth, giving her the illusion of privacy while he tended the flames. Vera watched him work, noting the efficient economy of his movements, the way he handled fire like someone who'd lived with it his whole life. A man comfortable in his own skin, in his own space. A man who'd built a sanctuary in the wilderness and was offering to share it with a stranger. Tobias, she said, surprising herself with the use of his name. He turned, firelight playing across his features. Yes? The woman you saved. What if she's more damaged than you think? What if the scars go deeper than silver can reach? Something flickered in his eyes, understanding, maybe, or recognition. Then she'll need more than a single winter's kindness to heal. She'll need time. Patience. And maybe someone willing to believe that even the most broken things can be made whole again. With that, he disappeared into what she assumed was his bedroom, leaving her alone with the dying fire and the weight of possibilities she didn't dare examine too closely. Vera settled back against the furs, pulling one over her shoulders as the cabin cooled. Outside, the forest sang its ancient lullaby of wind and wildlife, a sound that should have comforted her wolf. Instead, she found herself listening for something else, the steady rhythm of Tobias's breathing from the next room, the subtle sounds of a predator at rest. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept circling back to his words. Some debts are paid not with gratitude, but with sanctuary. As if he understood that what she needed wasn't appreciation for her kindness, but a place where kindness could exist without fear. As if he'd built this entire life around the hope of offering that gift to someone who'd once offered it to him. Her wolf stirred restlessly, caught between longing and terror. Longing for the safety he promised. Terror of what would happen if she let herself believe in it. From the bedroom came the soft sound of movement, not restless, but aware. As if Tobias was listening to her thoughts, her breathing, the subtle shifts of her body on the furs. Two predators sharing space, neither fully relaxed, both acutely aware of the other's presence. Neither fully human in the darkness. Vera's wolf pressed closer to the surface as sleep finally claimed her, and in her dreams she was running, not from something, but toward it. Through deep forests and moonlit clearings, following a scent that promised home. Behind her, something else ran with the same desperate hope, the same bone-deep need for connection. Two damaged souls, circling each other like planets caught in an inevitable orbit. Drawing closer with each turn around their shared sun. Chapter 3. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like ghostly fingers, and Vera found herself drawn to the cabin's small porch for the first time since her arrival 4 days ago. Tobias had maintained a careful distance, polite, respectful, never crowding her space or demanding conversation. Yet their wolves circled each other constantly, an invisible dance of recognition and wariness that left them both on edge. She'd watched him through the window as he went about his daily routines. The way he moved without disturbing so much as a twig underfoot, predator stealth that matched her own. How his head would turn toward the cabin before her foot even touched the floorboard, supernatural hearing that caught sounds no human ear could detect. The careful way he portioned out food, ensuring she always had enough while never making her feel like a burden, Alpha providing for his pack, even a pack of one damaged Omega. But it was the smaller gestures that undid her. The way he always approached from her right side, where her scars were less visible. How he kept his voice low and movements slow, as if afraid sudden motion might send her fleeing. The stack of books that had appeared on the table, not children's primers, but real literature that assumed intelligence and hunger for knowledge. As if he saw her as more than the broken creature she'd become. Now, standing on the threshold between cabin and forest, Vera felt her wolf pressing against her skin with an urgency that had been building for days. Too long in human form. Too long suppressing her nature. The silver burns on her wrists had healed completely, leaving only faint white lines as proof of her ordeal. Her body was ready to shift, even if her mind wasn't ready to trust. The sound of metal on stone drew her attention to the clearing's edge, where Tobias knelt beside an enormous crosscut saw, running an oiled whetstone along its teeth with practiced precision. His logging equipment was spread around him, axes, wedges, cant hooks, all maintained with the kind of care that spoke of a man who understood his tools were the difference between survival and death in the wilderness. "Good morning," he said without looking up, somehow aware of her presence despite her silent approach. "Sleep better last night?" She had, actually. The nightmares that usually plagued her rest had given way to dreams of running through moonlit forests, her wolf finally free to stretch its legs. But admitting that felt like acknowledging the growing sense of safety she felt here, and safety was still too dangerous to claim. Instead, she stepped fully onto the porch, her bare feet silent on the weathered wood. The morning air was crisp enough to raise goosebumps on her arms, but after years of sleeping rough, she found the cold invigorating rather than uncomfortable. "I used to love mornings like this," Tobias continued, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. The whetstone sang against steel in a rhythm that was almost musical. Before everything changed. There's something about dawn in the deep woods that makes you feel like the world's starting fresh. Clean slate, new chances. Vera found herself drawn toward the clearing's edge, careful to maintain distance while positioning herself where she could study his profile. In the morning light, with his attention focused on his work, she could see the lines around his eyes that spoke of too much sorrow for someone his age. The way his shoulders carried an invisible weight. The careful control in every movement that suggested violence held in check not by weakness, but by choice. A lone alpha. The phrase had haunted her thoughts for days, because lone alphas were almost unheard of. Leadership was in their blood, the need to gather and protect pack as fundamental as breathing. What kind of tragedy could drive an alpha to this self-imposed exile? "The woman who saved me," he said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. "I think about her most mornings. Wonder if she ever sees sunrises like this one." The whetstone paused in its rhythm. Vera's breath caught, but she forced herself to remain still. He'd mentioned the mysterious woman every day since her arrival, small comments woven into casual conversation like offerings left on an altar. Never demanding response, never pushing for details. Just remembering. Honoring a kindness that had clearly changed him. She had the gentlest hands, he continued, resuming his work. Could tell even through the fever and pain. Hands that knew how to heal, not just hurt. And her voice. He trailed off, shaking his head. Like nothing I'd ever heard. Strong enough to call a dying wolf back from the edge, but soft enough to chase away nightmares. Vera's throat tightened. She remembered that winter night with painful clarity, the way he'd thrashed with fever, calling out names she didn't recognize. How his wolf had whimpered and struggled, caught between human form and beast, unable to fully shift because of his injuries. She'd sung every lullaby she could remember, every healing song her grandmother had taught her, pouring all her desperate hope into her voice because it was the only medicine she had. "She stayed with me for 2 days, Tobias said. Never left my side, even when the storm got so bad the cabin walls shook. I was out of my head most of the time, but I remember her singing. Remember thinking that if I died listening to that voice, it wouldn't be such a bad way to go." The whetstone fell silent. When Vera looked up, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her wolf want to hide and preen simultaneously. As if he could see straight through her careful defenses to the truth cowering beneath. "You know what I regret most?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "That I never got to thank her properly. Never got to tell her what her kindness meant, or ask if there was anything I could do in return. She vanished like smoke the morning the storm broke, and I've been carrying that debt ever since." "You don't owe me anything," she wanted to say. "Your life was payment enough. Knowing someone could be saved, could go on living because of something I did, that was worth everything." But the words stuck in her throat, trapped behind years of learned silence and the terrible fear of what would happen if she let herself be truly seen. Instead, she found herself stepping into the clearing proper, drawn by some impulse she couldn't name. The morning sun slanted through the canopy overhead, painting everything in shades of gold and green. For the first time since arriving, she felt the urge to lift her face to the light, to let it warm skin that had been hidden for so long. Believing herself unobserved, Tobias had returned his attention to the saw, giving her the illusion of privacy. Vera slowly tilted her chin up toward the filtered sunlight. The sensation was extraordinary. Heat on her cheeks, brightness behind her closed eyelids, the scent of pine and wildflowers carried on the morning breeze. For a moment, she could almost believe she was the person she'd been before the boarding house, before the attack, before everything fell apart. She did that too, Tobias said softly. Vera's eyes snapped open, panic flooding her system. He was watching her with an expression of such gentle understanding that it nearly brought her to her knees. The morning she left, he continued. I woke up just as the sun was rising, and she was standing in the doorway doing exactly that. Face turned up to catch the first light, hair falling back from her shoulders. Most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. No. The denial clawed at her throat. She wasn't beautiful, hadn't been for years. The scars had made sure of that, carved her face into something that made people look away in discomfort or disgust. Beautiful was what she'd been before, when her cheeks were smooth and unmarked, when she could smile without feeling the pull of damaged tissue. I wanted to say something, Tobias went on, his voice barely above a whisper. Wanted to call out, ask her to stay. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she held herself, like someone who'd learned to expect pain from the world. Or maybe my wolf recognized something in her that needed protecting, even from gratitude. He set down the whetstone and rose to his feet with fluid grace, never taking his eyes off her face. I've been hoping for 3 years that wherever she is, she found somewhere safe. Someone who could see past whatever drove her into that storm and recognize her for the miracle she is. The words hit her like a physical blow. Miracle. When was the last time anyone had called her anything but damaged, broken, worthless? When had anyone looked at her and seen something worth saving instead of something to be discarded? Vera. Her name on his lips was a question and an invitation rolled into one. The voice that saved my life, it was yours, wasn't it? The truth hung between them like a bridge she could either cross or burn. For a moment, she teetered on the edge of denial, of retreat into the safety of anonymity. But something in his expression, hope mixed with certainty, as if he'd known all along and was simply waiting for her to trust him with the confirmation, made the decision for her. Slowly, trembling with more than just the morning chill, Vera pushed her hair back from the left side of her face. The effect was immediate and devastating. Tobias's breath hissed between his teeth, and his wolf's presence suddenly blazed like a bonfire, protective rage radiating from him in waves that made her own wolf whimper and cower. 3 parallel scars ran from her left temple to her jaw, raised and silver-white against her skin. They would have been hideous enough as ordinary wounds, but these carried the telltale signs of silver damage, the way the tissue had tried and failed to heal properly, leaving puckered, uneven lines that pulled at her face when she moved. One had nicked the corner of her mouth, giving her a permanent half-sneer that made smiling an exercise in deliberate defiance. Sweet Christ, Tobias breathed. What did they do to you? The question was so gentle, so full of horror on her behalf rather than revulsion at her appearance, that Vera felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking, opening. Like a door that had been locked so long she'd forgotten what lay beyond it. Silver claws, she whispered, the words scraping her throat raw. From another werewolf. Tobias went very still, the kind of stillness that preceded either violence or profound grief. One of your own pack did this to you? She nodded, not trusting her voice to hold steady. The memory of that night was still sharp enough to cut, the sound of claws against bone, the smell of her own blood, the way silver burned like liquid fire as it carved through her flesh. Why? The single word contained worlds of rage held in check. Vera closed her eyes, but the story poured out anyway. She'd held it inside for too long, let it fester in silence until speaking became the only way to lance the wound. I worked at a boarding house in Portland, she began, her voice barely audible. The owner was a beta werewolf named Marcus Cray. He had certain expectations of the women who worked for him. Said it was part of the job, servicing his needs. Tobias's hands clenched into fists, but he remained silent, letting her tell it at her own pace. I refused. The words came out stronger now, fueled by remembered defiance. I told him I wasn't that kind of woman, that he could find his comfort elsewhere. He said I didn't have a choice. Said omegas were meant to serve, and if I wouldn't do it willingly, he'd make sure I learned my place. The morning breeze shifted, carrying the scent of her remembered terror. Tobias's nostrils flared, his wolf responding to distress that was 3 years old but still fresh as an open wound. He came to my room that night, Vera continued, the words falling faster now, desperate to be free. Said he was tired of waiting, that I'd had my chance to be reasonable. When I tried to fight him off, he shifted his claws, just his claws, not his whole hand, and... She touched her scars reflexively. Silver-tipped. He'd had them done specially, he said. For disciplining difficult pack members. Son of a bitch, Tobias growled, his voice dropping to subharmonics that made the forest around them go quiet. He said he was marking me, Vera went on, past the point of stopping now. Said damaged goods fetched lower prices, but there were men who liked their women already broken in. But when he tried to, when he reached for me, I fought harder than he expected. We struggled, and he fell. Hit his head on the iron bed frame and... She swallowed hard. His neck snapped. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds had stopped singing, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Self-defense, Tobias said finally, his voice rough with suppressed violence. You were defending yourself. That's not how the pack saw it. Vera's laugh held no humor. An omega killing a beta? Even accidentally, even in self-defense, it was unthinkable. They said I'd overstepped my place, that I'd murdered someone above my station. The alpha ordered me sold to humans as punishment, with silver bindings to prevent shifting. Prevent healing, too, Tobias added grimly. They wanted you to carry those scars forever. She nodded. A reminder to other omegas about what happened to those who forgot their place. The rage that rolled off him then was like standing too close to a forest fire. His eyes flickered between human brown and wolf gold, and for a moment she caught a glimpse of the kind of alpha he must have been before whatever drove him to this exile. The kind who would have torn Marcus Cray apart with his bare hands and scattered the pieces across 3 counties. They were wrong, he said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. Everything they did to you, every word they spoke, wrong. You're not damaged goods. You're not broken. You're a survivor. The words hit her like a blessing and a blow simultaneously. Part of her wanted to believe him, to accept the absolution he offered. But 3 years of carrying the weight of that night, of believing she was somehow responsible for the violence that had marked her, didn't dissolve easily. Look at me, she whispered, gesturing to her scars. Really look. How can you say I'm not broken? Tobias stepped closer, moving with the careful precision of a man approaching a wounded animal. When he was close enough to touch, though he kept his hands carefully at his sides, he spoke with quiet intensity. I see a woman who survived torture at the hands of someone who should have protected her. I see someone who saved a stranger's life when she could have kept walking. I see the most beautiful voice I've ever heard, and eyes that hold more strength than that bastard ever dreamed of possessing. The scars are proof that you survived something that would have destroyed a weaker person. They're not marks of shame, Vera. They're badges of honor. She stared at him, this lone alpha who lived in voluntary exile, who'd built a sanctuary in the wilderness and offered to share it with a damaged omega he barely knew. The sincerity in his voice was almost painful to hear, because it meant she had to choose, between the safe misery of self-hatred and the terrifying possibility of believing she might be worth saving. The woman who saved me that winter, Tobias said softly, she had scars too. But when she sang to me in the darkness, when she kept me alive through sheer force of will and kindness, that was the most beautiful thing I'd ever encountered. Not despite the scars, not overlooking them. Beautiful because of what they represented. The strength it took to survive them, the compassion that remained intact despite everything she'd endured. Vera felt tears burning behind her eyes, the first she'd allowed herself in years. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to hear it. Because someone should have said it 3 years ago, and every day since. Because you deserve to know that surviving doesn't make you less than you were, it makes you more. The tears spilled over then, tracking down her scarred cheek like silver streams. But for the first time since that terrible night in Portland, they weren't tears of shame or self-pity. They were tears of grief, for the woman she'd been, for the years she'd lost, for the pain she'd carried alone. And beneath the grief, the faintest stirring of something else. Something that might, with time and patience and the steady regard of a man who saw miracles instead of damage, grow into hope. The morning sun climbed higher through the canopy, painting them both in shifting patterns of light and shadow. Two damaged souls, finally seeing each other clearly for the first time. The truth was out now, spread between them like a map of scars and secrets. What happened next would determine whether that truth became a bridge or a wall. But for the first time in 3 years, Vera found herself believing it might be a bridge after all. Chapter 4. The air between them hummed with possibility. In the days following Vera's revelation, something fundamental had shifted in the cabin's atmosphere. She no longer hid her face behind a curtain of hair, though she still moved with the careful grace of someone accustomed to making herself invisible. Tobias found himself hyper-aware of every breath she took, every subtle shift in her scent, every flutter of her pulse at the base of her throat. His wolf paced restlessly beneath his skin, not with aggression or dominance, but with a bone-deep recognition that left him breathless. Mate. The word whispered through his consciousness at the most inconvenient moments, when she handed him a cup of coffee, when she laughed softly at something he'd said, when she sat by the fire with her scars catching the light like silver threads in midnight fabric. It should have been impossible. Mate bonds were rare, precious things that couldn't be forced or manufactured. They simply were or weren't, a cosmic alignment that occurred maybe once in a generation. And even when they formed, they required both wolves to be whole, healthy, ready to open themselves to that level of connection. Vera was damaged. He was exiled. Neither of them should have been capable of the kind of bond his wolf was insisting existed between them. But impossible or not, he could feel it building, a pull that went beyond physical attraction or emotional connection. Something that made his alpha wolf gentle itself in her presence, that made her omega wolf lift its head from permanent submission and actually meet his eyes. "You're thinking very loudly," Vera said from her place by the window, where she'd taken to reading in the afternoon light. The book was one of his favorites, Wuthering Heights, and seeing her absorbed in Bronte's wild passion made his chest tight with emotions he wasn't ready to name. "Sorry," he said, forcing himself to focus on the venison he was preparing for dinner. "Didn't mean to disturb your reading." She set the book aside and turned to face him fully, a gesture that still made his heart stutter. 3 days of seeing her scars in daylight hadn't diminished their impact. If anything, knowing the story behind them made them more beautiful, not less. They were proof of survival, of strength, of a will that couldn't be broken even by silver claws. "Tell me about your pack," she said quietly. "Your birth pack, I mean. What made you leave?" Tobias's hands stilled on the knife. It was the first time she'd asked him a direct personal question, and the trust implicit in it wasn't lost on him. She'd shared her darkest moment, now she was inviting him to do the same. He set the knife aside and leaned against the counter, giving her his full attention. "The Cascade Pack. We controlled territory from Mount Hood to the Columbia River, about 200 wolves strong. Should have been paradise, rich hunting grounds, hidden valleys, enough space for everyone. Should have been," she repeated, catching the bitter note in his voice. "The Alpha was my father's cousin, a bastard named Jeremiah Stone. He took over when I was 15, and at first things seemed fine. He was strong, decisive, good at keeping the peace with neighboring packs." Tobias's jaw tightened. But absolute power has a way of corrupting even decent men, and Stone wasn't decent to begin with. Vera pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them in a gesture that made her look impossibly young. "What did he do?" "Started small. Demanding tribute from pack members who couldn't afford it. Choosing mates for the younger wolves based on politics rather than preference. But gradually it escalated. He began taking liberties with the unmated females, claiming Alpha's right. When anyone objected, they were exiled or worse. The memory of those dark years still made his wolf snarl with rage. He'd watched friends disappear, seen families torn apart by Stone's whims, witnessed the slow corruption of everything Pac was supposed to represent. You challenged him. It wasn't a question. Took me 5 years to work up the courage, Tobias admitted. I was a coward, told myself I was waiting for the right moment, gathering support, building a coalition. Truth was, I was terrified. Stone was older, more experienced, and he had the backing of the Pac Council. But you did it anyway. Finally. When he decided he wanted Sarah Coleman for his bed, despite her being mated to my best friend. The words came out harsh, guttural. She was 17. Sweet, innocent, barely shifted for the first time. He summoned her to his den and told her mate that if he interfered, he'd be executed for treason. Vera made a soft sound of distress, her scars pulling as her face tightened with sympathetic anger. I couldn't let it happen, Tobias continued. Couldn't stand by and watch him destroy another life. So I issued formal challenge, right there in the main lodge with half the pack watching. And you won. Again, not a question. She could see he was alive, unmarked by defeat. I won, he confirmed. Barely. Stone was cunning, vicious in ways I wasn't prepared for. But I was younger, hungrier, and I had something he didn't. Which was? Righteous fury. Tobias's smile held no warmth. Nothing makes an alpha stronger than protecting his pack. Problem was, winning the challenge didn't solve anything. Stone's supporters refused to accept my leadership, said I was too young, too idealistic. They threatened civil war if I tried to implement changes. Vera uncurled from her defensive position, sensing the heart of his pain approaching. So you left. I left. Walked away from everything I'd ever known rather than watch the pack tear itself apart. Figured it was better to have one exile than 50 dead wolves. He met her eyes, letting her see the cost of that decision. Been alone ever since. 5 years of voluntary isolation, watching my wolf slowly go feral from lack of pack connection. The admission hung between them like a confession. Lone wolves didn't survive indefinitely, they needed the social bonds, the shared hunts, the complex dynamics that came with pack life. Without it, they gradually lost their humanity, becoming more beast than man until they had to be put down for everyone's safety. Is that why you built this place? Vera asked softly. As a refuge? Partly. But also. He hesitated, then forged ahead. Also because I kept hoping someone would need it. Someone who understood what it meant to be cast out, to survive something that should have destroyed them. Someone like you, his wolf whispered, but he kept those words locked behind his teeth. Too much, too soon. She was just beginning to trust him with her past, he couldn't burden her with the impossible weight of his hope for their future. Instead, he returned to dinner preparations, giving them both space to process what had been shared. But the awareness between them had shifted again, deepened. They weren't just two damaged souls sharing sanctuary anymore. They were Alpha and Omega, recognizing something in each other that defied explanation. As the sun set and they sat down to eat, Tobias found himself studying Vera with new eyes. The way she moved had changed subtly over the past few days, less like prey avoiding detection, more like a wolf testing unfamiliar territory. Her scent had shifted too, the sharp edge of constant fear giving way to something warmer, more complex. Can I ask you something? She said, setting down her fork. Anything. That night in the blizzard, did you sense what I was? Before you were fully conscious, I mean. Tobias considered the question, sifting through fever-blurred memories. Not consciously. But my wolf knew. Recognized you as pack, as safe. That's probably why I didn't fight you when you tried to help. I was terrified you'd reject me once you woke up, she admitted. Omegas aren't exactly prized in most packs. We're seen as weak, needy, more burden than asset. Then those packs are idiots. The words came out with more heat than he'd intended, making her start slightly. Sorry. It's just, Omegas are the heart of any healthy pack. They're the nurturers, the healers, the ones who hold everything together when the alphas and betas are too busy posturing to notice the pack is falling apart. Vera stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. That's not, most alphas don't think that way. Most alphas are so busy proving their dominance they forget what leadership actually means, Tobias replied. Real strength isn't about forcing submission. It's about creating a space where everyone can be their best selves. Something flickered in her eyes, hope, maybe, or the first stirring of belief that she might have value beyond what others had told her she lacked. They finished dinner in comfortable silence, but the air thrummed with unspoken possibilities. As Tobias banked the fire for the night, he could feel Vera's eyes on him, tracking his movements with an intensity that made his wolf purr with satisfaction. Tobias, she said as he prepared to retreat to his bedroom. He turned, and the breath caught in his throat. She was standing by the window where moonlight painted her in silver and shadow, her scars transformed from marks of damage into something almost ethereal. Beautiful. Fierce. Alive in ways that had nothing to do with physical perfection. Would you, she stopped, swallowed, tried again. Would you like to sit by the fire for a while? I'm not ready to sleep yet. It was a small request, but the trust behind it was enormous. An invitation to share space without the buffer of tasks or conversation, to simply exist in each other's presence. I'd like that, he said softly. They settled on opposite ends of the fur-covered couch he'd built from lodgepole pine, close enough to share warmth but far enough apart that she wouldn't feel crowded. The fire crackled between them, painting dancing shadows on the log walls. I haven't felt safe in 3 years, Vera said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Not until I came here. Tobias's chest tightened. You are safe here. I give you my word. I know. That's what scares me. She turned to look at him, moonlight catching in her dark eyes. Safety makes you soft. Makes you hope for things that might not be possible. Like what? Like belonging somewhere again. Like maybe not being alone for the rest of my life. The words hung in the air between them, fragile as spun glass. Tobias felt his wolf surge forward, pressing against his control with desperate need. She was offering him something precious, not her body or her submission, but the possibility of connection. Of pack. Of home. You don't have to be alone, he said carefully. Not if you don't want to be. Even damaged as I am. You're not damaged. You're survived. There's a difference. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Sometimes I dream about running, she said. Not running from something, but running free. My wolf hasn't been able to fully shift since the attack, too much fear, too much trauma. But in the dreams, I'm whole again. Wild again. Your wolf isn't gone, Tobias said with absolute certainty. Buried, maybe. Protecting itself. But not gone. How can you be sure? Because I can sense her. She's there, just beneath the surface. Watching, waiting, deciding whether it's safe to emerge. Vera's breath hitched. You can sense her? The same way you can sense mine, I'd imagine. Alpha and Omega, we're designed to complement each other, to form bonds that go deeper than conscious thought. The words were out before he could stop them, laying bare the truth he'd been trying to contain. Vera went very still, her sense shifting to something complex and unreadable. Is that what this is? She asked finally. A bond? I think so. Or the beginning of one, if we let it develop. He met her eyes, letting her see his vulnerability. But only if you want it. I won't push, won't demand anything from you. The choice is entirely yours. She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. Finding none, she seemed to make some internal decision. Show me, she said softly. Show you what? Your wolf. Just a little bit. I need to see if she recognizes you. Tobias's heart hammered against his ribs. Partial shifting around a traumatized Omega was dangerous. If his wolf read her fear as rejection or challenge, it could destroy the fragile trust they'd built. But if it worked, if their wolves could connect without triggering her trauma. Are you sure? She nodded, though he could smell the spike of anxiety beneath her determination. Start small. Maybe just your eyes? Tobias took a deep breath and reached for his wolf. The shift came easily after years of practice, golden spreading through his brown irises until his eyes glowed like amber in firelight. Enhanced vision kicked in immediately, bringing the cabin into sharp focus. He could see Vera's pulse fluttering at her throat, the way her pupils dilated as she met his transformed gaze. Beautiful, she breathed, and her scent shifted to something warmer, richer. Recognition, his wolf whispered. Acceptance. Encouraged, he let a little more of his nature surface. Not enough to alarm her, just enough to let his presence fill the space between them with calm alpha energy. Protective. Patient. Safe. Vera's response was immediate and instinctive. Her head tilted slightly to one side, exposing the vulnerable line of her throat, not in submission, but in trust. Her own eyes flickered, brown warming to gold as her wolf stirred from its long hibernation. There she is, Tobias murmured, his voice roughened by the partial shift. Hello, beautiful. Vera's wolf looked at him through her eyes, wary but curious. She'd been hiding for so long, protecting them both from further harm. But something about his alpha presence called to her, promised safety and pack and home. Mine, his wolf rumbled, but gently. Ours to protect. Ours to cherish. She likes you, Vera said, wonder clear in her voice. I can feel her wanting to come closer. Let her. I won't hurt either of you. Slowly, hesitantly, Vera shifted across the couch until she was close enough to touch. Her wolf's influence was stronger now, evident in the fluid grace of her movements, the way she scented the air around him. When she reached out to touch his face, her fingertips were warm against his skin. Your wolf is so calm, she said. I'd forgotten they could be anything but aggressive or predatory. Alphas can be whatever their pack needs them to be. Right now, you need gentle. So that's what I am. She leaned into his touch as he cupped her scarred cheek, her eyes fluttering closed with something that might have been relief. For the first time since the attack, her wolf felt truly safe with another of their kind. They stayed like that until the fire burned low, wolves greeting each other across the bridge of their human connection. Not mating, not claiming, just recognition. The acknowledgement that they belonged together, that whatever had brought them to this moment had been worth the journey. When Vera finally pulled back, her eyes had returned to human brown, but something fundamental had changed. She looked at him now not as a stranger offering sanctuary, but as partner. Equal. The other half of something that had been incomplete for far too long. There's something I want to give you, Tobias said, rising from the couch. If you'll accept it. He disappeared into his bedroom, returning with something wrapped in soft deer hide. When he unfolded it, Vera gasped. It was a collar of sorts, but unlike anything she'd ever seen. Braided leather in rich brown and gold, woven through with strands of wolf fur in complementary shades. No metal, no silver, nothing that could burn or bind. Just natural materials worked with incredible skill into something both beautiful and practical. It's not ownership, he said quickly, seeing her stiffen. Not control or claim. It's protection. Protection from what? Other predators. Wolves, mostly, but also bears, cougars, anything that might see a lone omega as easy prey. The leather carries my scent, and the fur. He hesitated, then forged ahead. The fur is mine. From my wolf form. Any werewolf who smells it will know you're under alpha protection. Vera reached out to touch the collar with trembling fingers. The leather was butter soft, the workmanship exquisite. It would rest against her throat like a caress, not a chain. You made this? She asked. Started it the day after you arrived. Wasn't sure I'd ever have the courage to offer it. He met her eyes, letting her see his uncertainty. You don't have to wear it. But if you're planning to stay, to let this bond develop between us, it would make me feel better knowing you're protected when I'm not around. The implications of his words hung in the air. If you're planning to stay. Not a demand or expectation, but hope wrapped in uncertainty. The choice was hers, as it had been from the beginning. Vera lifted the collar from his hands, feeling the weight of possibility it represented. Trust. Protection. The promise of belonging to something larger than her own survival. Help me put it on, she asked softly. Tobias's hands shook as he fastened the collar around her throat, his knuckles brushing the sensitive skin at her nape. The leather settled against her like it had been made for her specifically, which, she realized, it had been. How does it feel? He asked. She touched the collar with wondering fingers, feeling his scent and presence wrapped around her throat like a living thing. For the first time in years, she felt truly protected. Claimed, not as property but as pack. As mate. Like coming home, she whispered. Outside, the forest sang its ancient lullaby of wind and wildlife, but inside the cabin, two wolves had found something rarer than safety or shelter. They'd found each other. The bond between them pulsed like a living thing, no longer just possibility but emerging reality. It would take time to fully form, time for trust to deepen and fear to fade. But the foundation was there now, solid as the mountains around them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Chapter 5. The forest had gone too quiet. Vera noticed it first during her morning gathering, the way the birds had stopped singing, how even the squirrels seemed to have vanished from the canopy overhead. The usual symphony of woodland life had been replaced by an oppressive silence that made her wolf pace restlessly beneath her skin. She hurried back to the cabin, her arms full of wild herbs and late-season berries, but the unease followed her like a shadow. Something was wrong. Something had disturbed the delicate balance of their sanctuary. Tobias, she called as she pushed through the door, but the cabin was empty. A note on the table, written in his careful script, told her he'd gone to the logging camp for supplies and would be back by evening. The normalcy of the message should have comforted her, but the wrongness in the air only intensified. She spent the day in restless motion, unable to concentrate on reading or any of the small tasks that usually kept her occupied. The collar around her throat, Tobias's collar, felt heavier somehow, as if responding to some unseen threat. By afternoon, her wolf was so agitated she considered shifting, something she hadn't done since arriving at the cabin weeks ago. It was well past sunset when she heard Tobias returning, but something in his gait made her stiffen. Too fast. Too urgent. The door banged open, and he swept inside with barely controlled violence radiating from every line of his body. Pack, he said without preamble. Now. Only what you need. Vera's blood turned to ice. What happened? Someone's tracking you. Professional, by the look of him. Claims to be a human bounty hunter, but his scent. Tobias shook his head grimly. Beta werewolf, and not the civilized kind. He's been asking questions at the camp, showing around what looked like a sketch of you. The berries scattered across the floor as Vera's hands went slack. After 3 years of running, 3 years of hiding, they'd found her. The pack hadn't forgotten, hadn't written her off as lost. They wanted her back, not for forgiveness, but for the justice they felt she still owed. How long do we have? She asked, already moving toward the few possessions she'd claimed as her own. Not long enough. Tobias was throwing supplies into a leather pack with military efficiency. He picked up your trail about 5 miles south. Old scent, but he's good. Too good. He'll be here by dawn, maybe sooner if. The howl that split the night air made them both freeze. Long, mournful, and definitely not wild wolf. It came from the south, maybe 3 miles away, and carried a message that made Vera's blood freeze in her veins. I know you're here. I'm coming for you. Shit, Tobias breathed. We're out of time. Another howl answered the first, closer this time. Then another. The hunter had brought friends, or found local wolves willing to help track down a fugitive Omega. Either way, their sanctuary had become a trap. I have to go, Vera said, her voice surprisingly steady. If I run now, draw them away from here, you'll be safe. You can tell them you never saw me, that. Like hell. Tobias's voice carried the kind of alpha authority that ended arguments. We face this together, or not at all. You don't understand. She grabbed his arm, desperate to make him see reason. They won't just take me. They'll kill anyone who helped me, anyone who interfered with pack justice. I won't let you die for me. And I won't let them take you. He caught her face in his hands, his eyes blazing with gold fire. You're my mate, Vera. Mine to protect. That means something, even if the rest of the world has forgotten. The word mate sent a shock through her system, not of surprise but of recognition. The bond between them had been growing stronger every day, every shared glance and gentle touch weaving them together until she couldn't imagine existing without him. But hearing him claim her so fiercely, seeing the absolute determination in his eyes, made something fierce and wild unfurl in her chest. Then we fight, she said, her wolf finally stirring from its long hibernation. But we do it smart. Tobias's smile was sharp as a blade. Now you're talking like an alpha's mate. They worked with desperate efficiency, transforming the peaceful cabin into a fortress. Tobias had been a warrior before his exile, and it showed in the way he barricaded entrances, positioned weapons, calculated angles of attack. Vera found herself falling into patterns she'd forgotten she possessed, omega instincts for protecting den and pack that 3 years of solitude hadn't entirely erased. Tell me about this hunter, she said as she helped him move furniture. What did you see at the camp? Big bastard, probably 6'4" and built like a prizefighter. Pale eyes, scars on his hands that looked like they came from silver. Called himself Cross, Roland Cross. Tobias's jaw tightened. But it was the way he moved that gave him away. Too fluid, too aware of everything around him. And his scent. What about his scent? Death, Tobias said simply. He smells like blood and death and the kind of satisfaction that comes from hunting your own kind. Vera shuddered. She'd heard whispers of wolves like that during her time with the boarding house, mercenaries who hunted rogue werewolves for money and reputation. They called them reapers, and they were feared throughout the supernatural community for their ruthlessness. A reaper, she breathed. They sent a reaper after me. You know of him? Know of them. Wolves who've given up their humanity to become perfect predators. They can track a scent across states, fight like demons, and they never give up once they've taken a contract. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They say Roland Cross has never lost a target. Then he's about to learn what failure tastes like. The confidence in Tobias's voice should have been reassuring, but Vera knew the reputation reapers carried. They didn't just kill, they enjoyed it. And they were very, very good at their job. Outside, the howls were getting closer. Multiple voices now, weaving together in a hunting song that made every instinct scream at her to run. But there was nowhere to go. The cabin sat in a natural clearing with forest on all sides, and wolves could outrun humans even in their natural form. Their only hope was to make a stand here, on ground Tobias knew intimately. When they come, he said, checking the load on his rifle, stay behind me. Let me handle Cross. Can you shift? Vera closed her eyes, reaching for her wolf. The creature was there, stronger than it had been in years, fed by weeks of safety and the growing bond with her alpha mate. But it was still damaged, still afraid. Partially, she said. Claws, enhanced senses, maybe some of the strength. But not a full shift. Not yet. It'll have to do. He handed her a wicked-looking skinning knife, its blade gleaming in the firelight. Silver-edged. If any of them get past me, don't hesitate. Go for the throat or heart, anything else might not stop them. The weight of the knife in her hand felt strange and terrible. 3 years ago, she'd killed a man with her bare hands, an accident born of desperation and self-defense. Tonight, she might have to kill again, but this time it would be deliberate. The thought should have horrified her. Instead, it felt like coming alive. Her wolf stirred, lifting its head for the first time in years. Someone was threatening her mate, her territory, her chance at happiness. The creature that had cowered and hidden was remembering what it meant to be a predator. The howls stopped. In the sudden silence, Vera could hear her own heartbeat, the whisper of wind through pine needles, the distant hoot of an owl. But underneath it all, barely perceptible even to enhanced hearing, came the soft pad of feet on forest floor. Multiple sets, moving with the coordinated precision of a pack on the hunt. They were here. Tobias moved to the window, peering through a gap in the barricade they'd erected. His body went rigid, and when he spoke, his voice carried the subsonic growl of an alpha preparing for battle. 4 of them. Cross and 3 locals, by the smell. They're surrounding the cabin. What do we do? We wait. Let them make the first move, learn how they plan to play this. But even as he spoke, Vera caught a scent that made her wolf whimper in recognition. Not the clean musk of wild wolves or even the complex signatures of pack werewolves. This was something else entirely, predator distilled to its purest form, stripped of everything human except cunning and hunger. Vera Blackthorn. The voice that boomed across the clearing was cultured, educated, completely at odds with the violence it represented. I know you're in there, little Omega. Come out, and we can discuss this like civilized creatures. Tobias snarled, his eyes blazing gold. The alpha in him responded to the casual dismissal, the way Cross spoke to his mate like she was still the cowering victim they'd sold into slavery. Roland Cross. Tobias called back, his voice carrying the authority of his bloodline. This is neutral territory. The woman is under my protection. Laughter echoed through the forest, rich and genuinely amused. Tobias Reed. I was wondering when you'd show yourself. 5 years in exile must have made you lonely, taking up with damaged goods. The insult hit its mark, but not in the way Cross intended. Instead of enraging Tobias, it crystallized his resolve. This wasn't just about protecting Vera anymore, it was about defending their bond, their right to exist outside the petty politics and cruelties of pack life. She's not damaged, Tobias said, his voice carrying clearly through the still air. She survived. There's a difference. Semantic games. The pack wants her back to face justice for murder, and I always deliver what I'm paid for. Cross's voice moved as he spoke, circling the cabin like a shark. This doesn't have to involve you, Reed. Walk away now, and I'll tell them you weren't here. Can't do that. Pity. I was hoping to avoid the mess. The attack came without warning. The eastern wall of the cabin exploded inward as something huge and fast smashed through the logs like they were kindling. Not Cross, one of his allies, shifted to full wolf form and moving with the lethal grace of a natural predator. Tobias met the charge head-on, his own partial shift rippling through him as claws extended and strength flowed into his limbs. The 2 wolves collided in a tangle of fur and fury, rolling across the cabin floor in a deadly embrace. Vera pressed herself against the far wall, knife gripped in white-knuckled fingers, as chaos erupted around her. Through the breach in the wall came another wolf, this one smaller but no less deadly, its eyes fixed on her with predatory hunger. Time slowed. Her wolf surged forward, lending her speed and reflexes she'd forgotten she possessed. The knife moved almost without conscious thought, silver edge finding flesh as the attacking wolf overshot its leap. The creature's yelp of pain and rage told her she'd drawn blood, but not enough to stop it. First blood to the little Omega, Cross's voice drifted through the broken wall, carrying casual amusement. How delightfully unexpected. The wounded wolf gathered itself for another attack, but this time Vera was ready. Weeks of safety, of growing confidence, of being valued rather than dismissed, had awakened something in her that 3 years of running hadn't managed to kill. She was done being prey. Her claws extended fully, silver-sharp and deadly. When the wolf came at her again, she met it with the fury of an Omega protecting her mate, her territory, her right to exist. The battle was brief and vicious, ending when her claws found the creature's throat and opened it to the night air. The sudden silence was deafening. Across the cabin, Tobias stood over his own defeated opponent, breathing hard but victorious. 2 down, but the most dangerous predator was still out there, and Vera could feel his presence like ice against her skin. Impressive, Cross said, his voice now coming from directly outside the shattered wall. Perhaps you're not as damaged as the reports suggested. He stepped through the breach like a king entering his throne room, and Vera's first sight of him made her blood freeze. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with fluid grace that spoke of absolute confidence in his own lethality. His hair was silver-white despite his relatively young face, and his pale eyes held the kind of emptiness that came from killing without conscience or regret. But it was his scent that truly terrified her. Beneath the musk of wolf and the metallic tang of spilled blood, she caught something else, silver. Not the trace amounts that came from old wounds, but the deep saturation that came from deliberate exposure. Somehow, he'd built up immunity to the metal that could cripple other werewolves. Roland Cross, Tobias said, moving to place himself between the hunter and Vera. I was wondering when you'd show yourself. No need for dramatics, Reed. You fought well, defended your territory like a proper alpha. But this ends now. Cross tilted his head, studying them with the detached interest of a scientist examining specimens. The pack wants her back alive, but they didn't specify in what condition. Give her to me, and you can walk away. Refuse, and I'll take her over your corpse. Then you'll have to take her over my corpse. Cross smiled, and the expression was more terrifying than any snarl. I was hoping you'd say that. The Reaper moved faster than thought, faster than any werewolf should have been able to move. But Tobias had been expecting it, had been reading the minute shifts in posture and breathing that preceded an attack. He met Cross halfway, and the sound of their collision was like thunder rolling through the forest. They were perfectly matched in size and strength, but Cross had advantages that quickly became apparent. Silver wire was woven through his claws, making every strike a potential crippling blow. His fighting style was pure efficiency, no wasted motion or unnecessary brutality, just the cold precision of a killer who'd never learned to doubt his own abilities. Vera watched in horror as her mate, her alpha, her protector, began to lose ground. Tobias was skilled, experienced, fueled by righteous fury and the need to protect what was his. But Cross was something beyond normal werewolf capabilities, enhanced by silver exposure and years of hunting his own kind. Blood flew as silver-laced claws found their mark across Tobias's ribs. The alpha stumbled, his healing already slowed by the cursed metal, and Cross pressed his advantage with ruthless efficiency. Stop. Vera stepped forward, knife forgotten, her wolf rising to full wakefulness for the first time in years. I'll come with you. Just stop hurting him. Both men froze, breathing hard, blood streaming from various wounds. Cross straightened slowly, his pale eyes fixing on her with predatory satisfaction. Vera, no, Tobias gasped, but she was already moving. I won't watch him die for me, she said, never taking her eyes off Cross. I've seen enough death. How touching. Cross wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. But I'm afraid the situation has changed. You've killed 2 of my associates, and Reed has proven to be more trouble than I anticipated. The pack will understand if I have to make some adjustments to my methods. The hunter's scent shifted, becoming something darker and more terrible. Not just predator now, but sadist. He'd been hired to bring her back alive, but nothing in his contract said anything about her sanity or her capacity for future resistance. Run, Tobias said quietly, his eyes never leaving Cross. When I give the signal, run for the tree line. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you. You have to. This isn't about capture anymore. He means to break you before he takes you back, and I won't let that happen. Cross laughed, the sound echoing through the ruined cabin like breaking glass. How noble. How utterly pointless. There's nowhere to run, Reed. My remaining associate has the perimeter covered, and I know these woods better than you think. Maybe, Tobias said, his voice dropping to the subsonic growl of an alpha issuing challenge. But you don't know me. The change that came over him was like watching a mountain come alive. This wasn't the gentle, controlled man who'd offered her sanctuary and built her a home. This was the alpha who'd challenged a corrupt pack leader and walked away from everything he'd ever known rather than compromise his principles. This was a warrior remembering what he was born to be. His partial shift deepened, bones elongating, muscles swelling with inhuman strength. But more than that, his presence filled the cabin like a living thing, pressing against the walls with the weight of absolute authority. For the first time since arriving, Cross looked uncertain. "You want her?" Tobias asked, his voice distorted by the changes in his throat. "You'll have to go through the Alpha of the Cascade Pack to get her." Cross's eyes widened in recognition and something that might have been fear. "The Cascade Pack fell 5 years ago. Stone's dead, the territory scattered." "Stone's dead," Tobias agreed. "But the pack never died. It just went into exile, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was stolen." His eyes blazed with golden fire as he looked at Vera, seeing not a damaged Omega but the foundation of everything he'd lost. "And now it has its Luna." The words hit Vera like a physical blow. Luna. Pack Mother. The female alpha who ruled beside her mate and protected all those under their care. She'd never dreamed of such a thing, never imagined herself as anything more than a survivor. But looking at Tobias, her mate, her alpha, the man who'd seen strength where others saw damage, she felt something ancient and powerful stirring in her chest. Not just her wolf, but something deeper. The part of her that had always known she was meant for more than cowering in the shadows. "Together?" he asked, extending his claws. Vera smiled, feeling her own shift ripple through her like liquid lightning. For the first time in years, it came easily, her wolf finally free to emerge without fear or shame. "Together," she said, and stepped up beside her alpha to face the hunter who thought he could take what belonged to them. Outside, the moon climbed higher, painting the forest in silver light. The night was young, and before it was over, blood would soak the earth. But for the first time in 3 years, Vera Blackthorn felt like coming home. The hunt was about to begin. Chapter 6. The moon hung fat and silver above the tree-line, its light turning the forest into a maze of shadows and secrets. Vera pressed her back against the rough bark of an ancient Douglas fir, her breath coming in short puffs that dissipated quickly in the crisp night air. Somewhere behind her, Roland Cross moved through the darkness with the patient inevitability of death itself. 3 hours. That's how long she'd been leading him deeper into the wilderness, using every trick her wolf had learned during 3 years of running. But Cross was relentless, his enhanced senses cutting through her attempts at misdirection like silver through flesh. He was gaining ground, and they both knew it. "This is insane," her human mind whispered as she forced herself to move again, following a deer trail that wound between towering pines. "He's faster, stronger, more experienced. This is suicide." But her wolf disagreed. Her wolf remembered the lessons of survival, the cunning that had kept them alive when brute force would have failed. And most importantly, her wolf remembered the trap-laden territory Tobias had spent years preparing, deadfalls and snares hidden throughout the deep forest, insurance against the day someone might threaten his sanctuary. The plan was desperate, dangerous, and probably doomed to failure. But it was the only chance they had. 4 hours earlier. Absolutely not. Tobias's voice carried the finality of an alpha's decree as he paced the length of the ruined cabin. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself. We find another way." "There is no other way." Vera stood her ground despite every instinct telling her to submit to his authority. The collar around her throat felt heavier now, weighted with the responsibility of being someone's mate, someone's equal. "Cross isn't going to give up. You hurt him tonight, damaged his reputation. He'll bring reinforcements, call in favors, turn this entire territory into a hunting ground until he finds us. Then we run. Together. Find new territory, start over somewhere else. And spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders?" She shook her head. "I'm tired of running, Tobias. Tired of being prey. If I'm going to die, I want it to be on my terms." The words hung between them like a challenge, and she could see the war playing out across his features. The alpha in him wanted to protect her, to shield her from all danger. But the man who'd come to know her these past weeks recognized the steel in her voice, the determination that had carried her through 3 years of hell. "Tell me the plan," he said finally. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by terror. Now she had to actually do it. The full moon is tomorrow night. Our wolves will be at full strength, yours and his. I lead him into the deep wilderness, into the territory you've prepared. Use the traps, the terrain, everything you've taught me about these woods. He's a reaper, Vera. He's hunted in every kind of terrain imaginable. But not these woods. Not your woods. And not against someone who spent 3 years learning to be invisible. She met his eyes, letting him see the certainty she was still trying to feel. Omegas aren't built for direct confrontation. We're built for survival, for outlasting our enemies. For being underestimated. Tobias was quiet for a long moment, his enhanced senses no doubt picking up the subtle changes in her scent, fear mixed with determination, desperation tempered by hope. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her wolf want to bare its throat. You'll have to shift. Fully. Your human form won't be fast enough to stay ahead of him. The words hit her like a physical blow. Full shift. She hadn't managed more than partial transformation since the silver scarring, the trauma too deep for her wolf to emerge completely. The thought of being fully vulnerable, fully exposed in wolf form, sent ice through her veins. I know, she whispered. But with the moon, with our bond. It might be possible. He moved closer, not crowding but offering comfort through proximity. I'll be there. My wolf will call to yours, help guide the transformation. Now, 3 hours into the hunt. The shift had been agony. Even with Tobias's support, even with the full moon's power flowing through her veins, forcing her wolf form had felt like tearing herself apart from the inside. The silver scarring had interfered with the transformation, leaving her smaller and weaker than she should have been. Her wolf was a shadow of what it had once been, compact, dark-furred, built more for speed and stealth than strength. But it was her wolf, finally free after years of imprisonment. And despite its diminished state, it remembered how to hunt, how to hide, how to turn weakness into advantage. Behind her, a branch snapped. Close. Too close. Vera flattened herself against the ground, using her smaller size to squeeze beneath a fallen log that would force Cross to go around. Her nose twitched as she caught his scent on the wind, predator musk mixed with silver and old blood. He was maybe 50 yards back, moving with the confident stride of someone who knew his prey was tiring. Good, her wolf thought. Let him think we're weakening. Let him get careless. She waited until his scent began to fade, then emerged from her hiding place and continued deeper into the wilderness. This part of the forest was older, wilder, full of deadfalls and hidden ravines that could break an unwary traveler's neck. Tobias had spent years learning every root and stone, mapping the dangers and opportunities. And he'd shared that knowledge with her during their long conversations by the fire, never knowing it might one day save both their lives. A stream burbled somewhere ahead, its voice almost lost beneath the whisper of wind through pine needles. Vera's enhanced hearing picked out the sound of water over stone, the particular gurgle that meant deep pools and hidden currents. Perfect. She reached the stream's edge and paused, testing the air. Cross was still following her original trail, maybe 2 minutes behind. Time enough to implement the next phase of her plan. Instead of crossing the stream, she turned and ran along its bank, her paws silent on the moss-covered stones. 100 yards upstream, she found what she was looking for, a place where the water had undercut the bank, creating a hollow just large enough for a small wolf to hide. Vera squeezed into the hiding spot and began the dangerous work of masking her scent. Omega wolves had abilities most packs never bothered to explore, the capacity to suppress their presence, to become nearly invisible to supernatural senses. It was an evolutionary adaptation that had helped their ancestors survive by avoiding conflict rather than winning it. The process was exhausting, requiring her to pull her wolf's essence so deep inside herself that she could barely maintain the shift. But gradually, her scent began to fade, becoming just another part of the forest's background symphony. Cross arrived at the stream 5 minutes later, his massive beta wolf moving with predatory grace. In the moonlight, he was magnificent and terrible, silver-white fur rippling with each movement, pale eyes reflecting light like mirrors. He stood nearly twice her size, built for power and domination. But even predators could be fooled. He sniffed at the water's edge where her trail ended, his great head swinging back and forth as he searched for some sign of her passage. Vera held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the hollow as he investigated the bank directly above her hiding place. For a moment, she thought he would find her. His nose was only inches from her muzzle, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath. One twitch, one betraying tremor, and the hunt would be over. Then his head lifted, nostrils flaring as he caught something else on the wind. A deer, moving through the forest upstream. Fresh prey that might have crossed Vera's trail, confusing the scent markers. Cross growled, a sound like distant thunder, then bounded away to investigate. Vera waited until she could no longer hear his movements before emerging from her hollow, exhaustion making her legs shake. The scent masking had taken more out of her than she'd expected, but it had worked. Round 1 to the desperate Omega. She set off again, this time heading for the heart of Tobias's prepared territory. The deadfall fields lay another mile ahead, places where he'd weakened trees so they would fall at the slightest disturbance, creating barriers and traps that could stop even a determined beta wolf. Behind her, she heard Cross's howl of frustration as he realized he'd been deceived. The sound echoed through the forest like a promise of retribution, but Vera found herself smiling as she ran. For the first time in years, she felt like a predator instead of prey. The thought of Tobias gave her strength as she navigated the treacherous terrain. He would be making his own desperate gambit tonight, contacting the Regional Alpha Council, presenting evidence of her innocence and the original pack's corruption. It was a long shot, but the council had authority over inter-pack disputes. If he could convince them that her original trial had been unjust. A branch whipped across her muzzle, drawing her attention back to the immediate danger. She'd let her mind wander, nearly running headlong into a tree. Focus. Survival first, hope later. The deadfall field stretched ahead of her like a moonlit graveyard, filled with the skeletal remains of trees that had fallen in predetermined patterns. Tobias had spent years creating this maze, using controlled burns and strategic cutting to channel intruders along specific paths. Paths that led to traps. Vera picked her way carefully through the obstacles, her smaller size allowing her to slip through gaps that would force Cross to take longer routes. Every minute of delay was a victory, every detour a chance to extend her lead. She was halfway through the field when she heard him behind her, the crash of a large body forcing its way through barriers meant to stop it. He was no longer trying for stealth, trading silence for speed in his desperation to close the distance. He's getting frustrated, her wolf observed with satisfaction. Frustrated predators make mistakes. As if summoned by the thought, the sound of splintering would echo through the forest, followed by a yelp of pain and surprise. One of the deadfalls had triggered, probably catching Cross in the hindquarters as he tried to bull through an opening too small for his bulk. The yelp became a snarl of rage, then a howl that made every animal within miles go silent. He wasn't badly hurt, the trap had been meant to slow, not kill, but his pride was wounded. And a wounded predator was even more dangerous than a frustrated one. Vera pushed herself harder, her small wolf form eating up the distance with desperate efficiency. The silver snares lay ahead, thin wires stretched across likely paths at throat height for a large wolf. They would be invisible in the moonlight, nearly undetectable even to enhanced senses. But she had to reach them before Cross caught up. His rage was making him reckless, but it was also lending him speed. The sound of his pursuit was getting closer, the crash of his passage through the deadfall field like an approaching avalanche. She burst out of the trees into a small clearing, moonlight turning the open space into a silver stage. This was where Tobias had placed his most elaborate trap, a pit covered with woven branches and moss, designed to look like solid ground. Deep enough to hold a large wolf, lined with silver mesh to prevent easy escape. Vera leaped the hidden pit easily, her smaller size and intimate knowledge of its location making the obstacle trivial. She landed on the far side and spun to watch Cross's approach, her heart hammering against her ribs. He exploded into the clearing like a force of nature, his pale eyes blazing with predatory fury. Blood matted his silver fur where the deadfall had caught him, but the wound only seemed to have fed his rage. He spotted her immediately, his lips pulling back to reveal fangs that gleamed in the moonlight. For a moment, they stared at each other across the trap-laden clearing. Predator and prey, hunter and hunted, both of them pushed beyond the limits of endurance by the deadly game they played. Then Cross charged. He was magnificent in his fury, a creature of pure lethal grace covering the distance between them in massive bounds. But fury made him careless, and he was focused entirely on his prey rather than the ground beneath his feet. The pit trap held. One moment Cross was airborne, death incarnate given wolf form. The next, he was crashing through the concealing branches into the silver-lined hole Tobias had spent weeks preparing. His howl of surprise and rage echoed from the pit as he discovered the mesh that would burn his paws if he tried to climb out. Vera approached the edge carefully, peering down at the trapped reaper. He glared up at her with eyes like winter ice, his massive form filling the pit but unable to escape it. "You think this will hold me?" he snarled, his voice distorted by the partial shift between wolf and human speech. "I've escaped from better prisons than this." "Maybe," Vera replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "But not tonight. And probably not before the council arrives." Cross's eyes narrowed. "What council?" "The Regional Alpha Council. My mate is presenting evidence of my innocence to them right now. Evidence of the corruption in my original pack, of the illegal trial that condemned me." She felt her confidence growing with each word. "You're not hunting a fugitive anymore, Cross. You're holding a free wolf against her will." "Lies." But something flickered in his pale eyes, doubt, perhaps, or the first stirring of concern. "We'll see." Vera backed away from the pit, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The extended shift was taking its toll, her wolf form wavering as her strength failed. "The council has authority over inter-pack disputes. If they rule in my favor." "If they rule in your favor, I'll be the one facing charges," Cross finished grimly. "Unlawful detention. Assault. Maybe worse, depending on what your mate tells them." The admission sent a thrill of victory through her, but she was too tired to savor it. The transformation was becoming unstable, her human and wolf aspects fighting for control as her energy depleted. She needed to find shelter, someplace safe to complete the shift back to human form. "This isn't over," Cross called after her as she stumbled toward the tree line. "Even if the council clears you, there are others who remember what you did. Others who want their own justice. Then they'll have to go through my pack to get it," Vera replied, her voice already changing as the shift began. "And I don't think they'll like the odds." She made it to a small grove of birch trees before her wolf form finally collapsed, the transformation flowing through her like liquid fire. When it was over, she lay naked and shivering among the fallen leaves, human once more but alive. Alive and free. In the distance, she could hear Cross testing the strength of his silver prison, the frustrated snarls and crashes echoing through the forest. But the trap would hold. Tobias had built it to contain creatures much larger than a single beta wolf. Dawn was still hours away, but she could feel the first stirrings of hope warming her chest. The hunt was over. The trap had worked. And somewhere in the civilized world, Tobias was fighting for their future with words instead of claws. She closed her eyes and listened to the forest around her, the whisper of wind through leaves, the distant call of a night bird, the slowly fading sounds of an imprisoned predator. For the first time in 3 years, the night felt peaceful instead of threatening. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like she might actually have a future. The blood moon climbed toward its zenith, painting the world in shades of silver and shadow. But in a small grove of birch trees, a wolf who had learned to be human smiled at the stars and dared to hope. The hunt was over. The healing could finally begin. Chapter 7. Dawn was still hours away when Vera heard the voices approaching through the forest, multiple footsteps, the low rumble of alpha conversation, and beneath it all, the familiar scent that made her wolf sing with relief. Tobias was coming, and he wasn't alone. She pulled herself upright against the birch tree, every muscle in her body protesting the movement. The hunt and forced transformation had taken everything she had, leaving her weak and shivering in the pre-dawn cold. But alive. Triumphant, even, in a way she hadn't dared hope for. From the direction of the trap, Cross's snarls had grown more desperate, the silver mesh burning his paws each time he tried to climb free. The Reaper who had never failed to bring back his quarry was learning what it felt like to be prey. Vera. Tobias's voice cut through the forest silence, tight with concern and barely controlled fear. Where are you? Here, she called back, her voice hoarse from the transformation. In the birch grove. The sound of running feet, then Tobias burst through the trees with his jacket already off, wrapping it around her naked form before she could even think to feel exposed. His hands shook as he pulled her against his chest, his scent flooding her senses with safety and home. Are you hurt? He pulled back to examine her face, his eyes blazing gold with protective fury. Did he? I'm fine. She caught his hands, stilling their anxious exploration. Tired, but fine. The trap worked. He's caught. Relief flooded his features, followed immediately by pride that made her chest warm despite the cold. My clever mate. I knew you could do it. Mate. The word still sent shivers through her, but good ones now. Claiming ones. The council, she asked. Came as soon as I presented the evidence. 3 alphas, Marcus Kane from the Northern Territories, Elena Voss from the Coast Range, and David Thorne from the Cascades proper. His jaw tightened. They were interested to learn about the irregularities in your original trial. Footsteps approached through the trees, and Vera instinctively pressed closer to Tobias as 3 figures emerged from the shadows. Even in human form, the Council Alphas carried an aura of authority that made her Omega instinct sing with nervous energy. These were the wolves who arbitrated disputes between packs, whose word was law among their kind. Marcus Kane stepped forward first, a tall, lean man with silver threading his dark hair and eyes like winter steel. His presence was calm, controlled, the kind of leader who ruled through wisdom rather than force. Vera Blackthorn, he said, his voice carrying the formal cadence of pack law. I am Marcus Kane, speaking for the Regional Alpha Council. We've come to investigate claims of injustice surrounding your exile and current pursuit. Vera struggled to sit straighter, Tobias's jacket clutched around her like armor. Thank you for coming, Alpha Kane. The gratitude is premature, Elena Voss interjected, stepping into the moonlight. She was smaller than Kane but radiated the kind of coiled power that came from leading coastal packs, wolves who fought storms and tides as much as they fought each other. We're here to determine truth, not dispense comfort. The third alpha, David Thorne, remained silent, but his attention was focused entirely on Vera with an intensity that made her want to hide. He was younger than the others, broad-shouldered and dark-haired, with the kind of presence that filled up all the available space. Where is the hunter? Kane asked. Trapped, Tobias replied. About half a mile north, in the Silver Pit. And what of his testimony regarding your guilt? Voss asked Vera directly. Cross claims you murdered a beta in cold blood, then fled to avoid pack justice. The old fear tried to claw its way up Vera's throat, but she forced it down. These alphas weren't Marcus Cray or the corrupt leaders who'd condemned her. They were here for truth, not politics. I killed him in self-defense, she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. He tried to rape me. When I fought back, he fell and broke his neck. A convenient accident, came a new voice from the shadows. Everyone turned as a figure stepped into the clearing, a woman Vera recognized with a shock that nearly stopped her heart. Iris Vale, the quiet Omega who'd worked in the boarding house kitchen, who'd seen everything but said nothing when the pack's mock trial condemned her. But something was different about Iris now. She moved with confidence instead of cowering submission, her shoulders straight and her head high. 3 years of exile had changed her, just as they'd changed Vera. Iris, Vera breathed. What are you doing here? What I should have done 3 years ago, Iris replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. Telling the truth. Kane stepped forward, his alpha senses no doubt picking up the complex interplay of scent and emotion. You were there? The night of the alleged murder? I was in the kitchen, Iris said. Working late, cleaning up after the dinner service. I heard Vera screaming from upstairs, heard the sounds of a struggle. When I went to investigate. She paused, swallowing hard, but her resolve didn't waver. I saw Marcus Cray on top of her, his claws out, silver-tipped. He'd already cut her face. I could smell the blood, the silver burning her flesh. She was trying to push him off, and he was laughing. Said she was going to learn her place whether she wanted to or not. The words fell into the clearing like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and anger. Vera felt Tobias's grip tighten on her shoulders, his wolf snarling just beneath his skin. Continue, Kane ordered, his voice deadly quiet. She got her legs up between them, pushed him back. He stumbled, hit his head on the iron bed frame. I heard his neck snap. Iris's eyes found Vera's across the clearing. I should have spoken up at the trial. Should have told them what I saw. But I was afraid they'd punish me for witnessing it, for not preventing it somehow. Why speak now? Voss asked, though her tone had warmed considerably. Because I've spent 3 years living with the guilt. 3 years knowing an innocent woman was suffering for defending herself while I said nothing. Iris straightened her shoulders. And because I heard Cross was hunting her. Someone had to tell the truth before it was too late. Silence settled over the clearing as the Council Alphas processed this testimony. Vera could practically see them cataloging scents, reading the micro-expressions that would tell them if Iris was lying. But werewolves couldn't lie convincingly to other werewolves. Not about something this significant, not when emotions ran this high. The scent confirms truth, Thorne spoke for the first time, his voice deep and resonant. She believes what she's saying. More than believes, Kane added grimly. She's telling exactly what she witnessed. The question now is what to do about it. What about Cross? Voss asked. His pursuit was based on false information, but he had a legitimate contract from a recognized pack. A pack that lied to him, Tobias interjected. That sold one of their own to humans to cover up a beta's attempted rape. That's not just injustice, it's a violation of every law that governs our kind. Kane nodded slowly. The implications go far beyond this single case. If we allow packs to exile members based on false testimony, to sell wolves to humans as punishment, it sets a precedent that could destroy pack law entirely, Thorne finished. A new sound cut through their discussion, the approaching crash of something large forcing its way through the forest. Cross, Vera realized with a chill. Somehow, he'd escaped the silver trap. The Reaper burst into the clearing like an avenging demon, silver burns covering his hands and forearms where he'd clawed his way out of the pit. His pale eyes blazed with fury as they fixed on Vera, and she could see the moment he decided that if he couldn't take her back alive, he'd settle for her death. He was shifting as he moved, bones elongating and muscles swelling with inhuman strength. But before he could complete the transformation, 3 Council Alphas stepped between him and his target. The display of coordinated alpha dominance was breathtaking. Kane, Voss, and Thorne moved as one, their combined presence pressing down on Cross like a physical weight. His partial shift stuttered, then reversed as his wolf was forced to submit to superior authority. Stand down, Reaper, Kane commanded, his voice carrying subsonic harmonics that made every werewolf in the clearing flinch. Your contract is void. Like hell it is, Cross snarled, but he didn't dare take another step forward. I was hired to bring back a murderer. You were hired based on false testimony, Voss corrected coldly. We've heard the truth from an eyewitness. Your quarry acted in self-defense. Then you've been lied to. We can smell lies, Reaper, Thorne interrupted. Just as we can smell the silver enhancement in your system. How long have you been using forbidden augmentation? Cross's face went pale. Silver enhancement was illegal among their kind, a form of chemical alteration that improved hunting abilities at the cost of long-term health and sanity. That he'd been using it explained his incredible speed and strength, but it also made him an outlaw in the eyes of pack law. The Regional Council finds Roland Cross guilty of unlawful pursuit, use of forbidden enhancement, and conspiracy to harm an innocent pack member, Kane announced formally. You are stripped of your hunting privileges and banned from all pack territories. And the Alpha who hired him? Tobias asked. Will face judgment in his own territory, Voss replied grimly. Selling a pack member to humans, covering up attempted rape, bearing false witness to a council investigation, his authority is forfeit. Vera felt something break open in her chest, not breaking apart, but breaking free. The weight she'd carried for 3 years, the guilt and shame and constant fear, suddenly lifted like morning mist. She was free. Not just physically free, but legally, officially cleared of the crime that had destroyed her life. Vera Blackthorne, Kane said, turning to address her formally. You are declared innocent of all charges. Your exile is ended, your name cleared. You may choose your own pack allegiance or remain as a free wolf, as you see fit. The formal words should have been enough. Should have been everything she dreamed of during the long years of running. But as she looked at Tobias, her mate, her protector, her chosen alpha, she realized there was one more thing she needed to do. Rising to her feet, still wrapped in Tobias's jacket, she felt her wolf stirring again. Not the desperate, damaged creature that had fled through the forest hours ago, but something stronger. Something that had remembered what it meant to belong to a pack of 2. The howl that emerged from her throat was unlike anything she'd produced in years. Not the broken cry of a wounded omega, but the complex song of mate claim and pack bond that resonated through supernatural frequencies. It spoke of choice freely made, of strength found in partnership, of 2 lone wolves becoming something greater together. Tobias's answering howl twined with hers, alpha harmonies wrapping around omega melodies in perfect synchronization. When the song ended, the very air seemed to thrum with the power of their bond. Well, Kane said into the sudden silence, a slight smile softening his stern features. I believe that answers the question of pack allegiance. Vera looked up at Tobias, seeing her own wonder reflected in his gold-flecked eyes. They'd found each other in darkness and saved each other from despair. 2 damaged souls becoming whole through the simple act of believing they deserved happiness. The trial was over. Justice had been served under the watchful stars. But more importantly, the healing could finally begin. In the distance, dawn touched the mountain peaks with fire, painting the sky in shades of hope. A new day was beginning, for them, for their nascent pack, for the future they would build together. Together, as it was always meant to be. Chapter 8. Spring came to the mountains like a whispered promise finally kept. Vera stood at the cabin's window, watching new growth push through the forest floor in defiant splashes of green. 3 months had passed since the council's judgment, 3 months of healing that went deeper than flesh and bone. The silver scars on her face had faded to thin white lines that caught the light like threads of starshine, and for the first time in years, she saw beauty in her reflection instead of damage. Behind her, Tobias worked at the table, carefully shaping metal over a small forge he'd built in the cabin's corner. The silver that had once bound her wrists in captivity was being transformed into something else entirely, rings that would carry their bond across any distance, forged from the very metal that had once represented her suffering. The temperature needs to be precise, he murmured, not looking up from his work but sensing her attention through the mate bond that now hummed between them like a living thing. Too hot and the enchantment won't hold. Too cool and the metal won't accept the wolf magic. She could feel his concentration through their connection, the careful balance of human skill and supernatural instinct required to create something that existed in both worlds. The bond had grown stronger each day since the trial, until they could share not just emotions but actual strength, helping each other through difficult transformations or moments of remembered trauma. Iris should be here soon, Vera said, turning from the window as the sound of approaching footsteps reached her enhanced hearing. She's bringing the others. The others. Their small pack of misfits and outcasts, wolves who'd found family outside traditional pack structures. It had started with Iris, who'd chosen to stay after the trial rather than return to her old territory. Then came Samuel, a young alpha who'd been exiled for refusing to fight his own brother. Maria followed, an omega whose gifts as a healer had been dismissed by her birth pack as weakness rather than strength. One by one, they'd found their way to the mountain sanctuary, drawn by stories of the alpha and omega who'd faced down the council and won. More than that, drawn by the promise of belonging without submission, of strength that didn't require others to be weak. The door opened to admit Iris, her arms full of wildflowers and her face glowing with the kind of contentment that came from finally being valued for who she was. She'd grown into her role as beta female with surprising confidence, becoming the bridge between Vera's gentle leadership and Tobias's protective authority. "The meadow is perfect," she announced, setting down her floral burden. "Samuel and Maria have the circle prepared, and David's brought enough venison to feed an army." David, the young alpha they'd rescued from silver poisoning 2 weeks ago. His pack had cast him out for showing mercy to trespassing humans, calling his compassion weakness. Now he served as their hunter and scout, his skills honed by months of surviving alone in hostile territory. "Any word from the council?" Tobias asked, finally looking up from his metalwork. The rings were taking shape, not the simple bands humans might exchange, but complex spirals that would hold wolf magic and amplify their natural bond. "Marcus Kane sends his blessing," Iris replied. "The other alphas are curious about what we're building here. Some approve, others think we're setting a dangerous precedent." "Let them think," Vera said firmly. "We're not asking their permission to exist." The words would have been impossible for her to speak 3 months ago, too bold, too defiant for someone who'd learned to survive by being invisible. But the mate bond had changed her in fundamental ways, Tobias's steady strength flowing into her through their connection until she could access courage she'd never known she possessed. More than that, leading their small pack had awakened something in her that traditional pack structure had never allowed to emerge. She wasn't just Tobias's mate, she was Luna to wolves who needed gentleness instead of dominance, healing instead of conquest. "The sun's setting," Tobias observed, banking the forge's fire. "Time to prepare." They'd chosen the new moon for their ceremony deliberately, the night when their human sides were strongest, when they could speak vows with tongues instead of howls. But tradition demanded the ritual end with the pack hunt, their wolves running free under starlight to celebrate the bond between Alpha and Luna. Vera retreated to the cabin's small bedroom to prepare, her hands steady as she arranged the ceremonial garments she'd created over the past weeks. No traditional white dress for a frontier wedding, instead, she'd crafted something that honored both her human heritage and her wolf nature. The dress was soft deerskin, tanned to buttery perfection and decorated with intricate beadwork that told the story of her journey from victim to survivor to leader. Strips of the same leather would serve as her veil, woven through with wildflowers and small bones that caught the light like captured stars. But it was the crown that made her breath catch each time she saw it. Instead of hiding her scars beneath fabric or flowers, she designed the headpiece to frame them, delicate silver wire work that followed the lines of her face, turning marks of trauma into something almost ethereal. "Beautiful," Iris breathed from the doorway, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You look like a queen of the wild places." "I feel like myself," Vera replied, and realized it was true. For the first time since that terrible night in the boarding house, she felt complete, not despite the scars, but because of everything they represented. Survival. Strength. The courage to keep living when death would have been easier. Outside, voices called through the gathering dusk. Their pack assembling for the ceremony, along with a few trusted allies who'd made the journey to witness something unprecedented, the mating of wolves who'd chosen love over law, healing over tradition. Tobias waited for her at the forest's edge, magnificent in his own ceremonial leathers. He'd braided silver wire through his dark hair, and the rings he'd forged hung from a chain around his neck, gleaming in the torchlight like captured moonbeams. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "I've been ready for this my whole life," she replied. "I just didn't know it until I found you." The meadow where they'd chosen to hold the ceremony was a natural amphitheater surrounded by towering pines, their branches creating a cathedral ceiling overhead. Torches marked the sacred circle, and their small pack had gathered within, not just witnesses, but family bound by choice rather than blood. Marcus Kane stepped forward as officiant, his presence lending weight to vows that would otherwise exist outside the law of both human and wolf society. He'd traveled 3 days to be here, a gesture that spoke volumes about the council's changing attitude toward their unconventional pack. "We gather under stars and ancient trees," Kane began, his voice carrying easily through the still air, "to witness the joining of Alpha and Luna, the binding of wolves who've chosen each other across all obstacles and against all odds. The words were traditional, older than human memory, but Cain adapted them for the unique circumstances of their mating. This wasn't just the union of compatible wolves arranged by pack politics. This was the recognition of a bond forged in fire and sealed in blood, tested by trial and proven by choice. Tobias Reed, Cain continued, do you claim this woman as your mate, your equal, your partner in all things? I do, Tobias replied, his voice steady despite the emotion Vera could feel thrumming through their bond. Not as property to be owned or protected to be sheltered, but as the other half of my soul. Vera Blackthorne, Cain turned to her, and she was grateful for the months of healing that let her meet his eyes without flinching. Do you accept this man as your mate, your alpha, your partner in leading those who choose to follow? I do, she said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. As he accepts me, scars and strength, silence and song, exactly as I am. The rings came next, Tobias's metalwork proving its worth as the silver spirals seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The moment the metal touched her skin, Vera gasped, not from pain, but from the sudden intensification of their bond. She could feel Tobias's heartbeat as if it were her own, sense his wonder and joy as clearly as her own emotions. Now and always, they spoke the final vows in unison, their voices twining together like their souls had been joined. One heart, one mind, one pack. Cain smiled, the stern alpha allowing genuine warmth to show through his formal demeanor. By the authority of moon and star, earth and sky, I declare you mated in the eyes of both human law and wolf tradition. What has been joined in love cannot be sundered by fear. The howl that erupted from their small pack shook the very trees, voices raised in celebration and recognition. But it was Vera's voice that soared above the rest, not the broken whisper of a damaged Omega, but the clear song of a Luna claiming her territory and her mate before all who would listen. Other voices answered from the darkness beyond the torchlight, lone wolves in the mountains, drawn by the promise of something different. Something better than the rigid hierarchies and casual cruelties that had driven them into exile. They're coming, Tobias breathed, wonder clear in his voice as more howls joined the chorus. They're actually coming. Of course they are, Vera replied, her hand finding his as understanding dawned. We're not just mated now, we're the beginning of something new. A pack built on healing instead of dominance, on choice instead of submission. The ceremony dissolved into celebration as wolves began shifting around them, their human guests stepping back to give the pack room to complete the ritual in their other forms. Vera felt the change flow through her like warm honey, her wolf emerging not in fear or desperation but in pure joy. The pack hunt that followed was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, not the desperate flight through hostile territory she remembered from her exile, but the shared joy of wolves running free under starlight. Their small pack moved as one through the mountain forests, welcoming the lone wolves who emerged from hiding to join their song. By dawn, their pack had tripled in size. They returned to human form as the sun painted the peaks with fire, exhausted but exhilarated by the night's revelations. The meadow that had hosted their mating ceremony now served as an impromptu camp, with new pack members sharing stories of exile and dreams of belonging. Vera found herself at the center of it all, no longer the silent shadow who'd learned to survive by being invisible. She was Luna now, not just Tobias's mate, but the heart of something larger than either of them had imagined possible. No regrets? Tobias asked as they stood together watching the sunrise, his arm warm around her shoulders. Only one, she replied, leaning into his warmth. Which is? That I waited so long to find my voice. She turned to face him, letting him see the absolute certainty in her eyes. My silence never defined me, Tobias. I defined when to break it. And breaking it for you, for this. She gestured toward their growing pack, wolves finding family in the most unlikely places. This was worth waiting for. He kissed her then, soft and reverent, their mate bonds singing with shared joy and infinite possibility. Around them, their pack began the work of building something unprecedented, a society where strength didn't require others to be weak, where healing mattered more than hierarchy. In the Wild West, where survival often meant hiding your true nature, they'd found something rarer than gold or glory. They'd found love that let them be exactly who they were meant to be, not despite their scars, but because of everything those scars represented. The future stretched before them, bright as the rising sun. And for the first time in either of their lives, they faced it not as lone wolves struggling to survive, but as the leaders of something beautiful and strange and utterly their own. A pack built on love instead of fear. A family chosen rather than inherited. Home, at last, for wolves who'd forgotten what belonging felt like. The story of the lonely Alpha and the silent Omega was ending. The legend of the Luna who found her voice and the pack that chose love over law was just beginning. Thank you for listening to this story. Like, share and subscribe for more.